Sir, I need your license and I need proof of citizenship.
What's the legal basis for asking citizenship at this checkpoint?
Answer the question. Are you a U.S. citizen, yes or no?
Yes, I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm also federal law enforcement. I can be verified immediately through official channels.
Man, don't try to fool me. Show me proof.
I can present credentials or call a supervisor and verify.
What happens when ICE agents set up a surprise checkpoint at a shopping plaza exit and demand citizenship proof from a black U.S. Marshal, then refuse to verify him even after he showed federal credentials? The answer is right here in this situation. Before we get into it, comment where you're watching from. And if you like stories where people keep their composure, know their rights, and still hold the system accountable, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the ending. This happened in San Antonio, Texas, at a well-lit shopping plaza exit, where cars funneled from the parking lanes into one tight choke point before the main road. A temporary safety checkpoint had been set up without warning. Cones narrowed the exit. Two unmarked SUVs sat angled like they owned the lane. Agents in tactical vests worked the line fast, waving most cars through after a quick look, stopping others for longer conversations that didn't match the safety label. William Martinez drove into that lane like everyone else. He had just left a city police department and was now a U.S. Marshal. He wasn't dressed like he was heading to court or serving a warrant. He looked like a guy leaving errands, because that's what he was doing. The only difference was what sat in his wallet and what he knew about procedure. At first, it looked routine. An agent stepped up as William rolled to a stop. The agent didn't treat it like traffic flow management. He treated it like a status check. He demanded more than a driver's license, and the tone wasn't curiosity. It was suspicion, like William had already failed a test he didn't know he was taking. William stayed controlled. He provided identification. He made it simple. He informed the agent that he was a federal officer and that verification could be done immediately through official channels. He didn't argue about politics or the checkpoint itself. He focused on the one thing that should have ended the stop: confirmation. That's where the agent made his first decision. Instead of taking the obvious step, calling a supervisor, contacting a listed office number, or running William through standard systems, the agent treated William's attempt to verify as a challenge. He demanded additional documentation that didn't match the situation. He shifted the stop from checkpoint screening into a personal interrogation. William didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He didn't reach suddenly or act dramatic. He kept his hands visible and repeated the same offer: verify through proper channels. He also requested a supervisor, because that's what you do when the contact goes off the rails. The agent didn't like that. He signaled for another agent, turning it into a 2-on-1 stance immediately. That second agent arrived with the body language of someone told there was a problem, not someone told there was a misunderstanding. The first agent summarized William as not cooperating in a way that made William's calm look like defiance. This is a common tactic in power encounters. Redefine calm boundaries as non-compliance, then use non-compliance to justify force. William kept it procedural. He identified his agency again. He indicated how to verify. He did not consent to unnecessary rummaging, but he didn't physically resist anything. He asked for names and badge numbers in a steady tone. He also pointed out that they were in public and that there were cameras. The agents acted like the cameras didn't matter. They ordered William out of the vehicle, not because he had committed a visible crime, not because he was a threat, because they wanted control of the space and the narrative. They wanted him standing beside the car, away from the steering wheel, away from the normal rhythm of a stop, where they could reposition him, search him, and manage what bystanders saw. William complied with the exit order because he understood how quickly refusal can be written into a report. He stepped out slowly and he kept his hands visible. He stayed focused on process. He repeated the supervisor request. The first agent moved directly into a search posture. A pat-down happened in full view of the exit lane, with cars creeping past and drivers staring. The second agent hovered close, watching William's hands, watching his face, watching for a reaction they could label as aggressive. Then the wallet came out. The agents went through William's wallet like they were looking for a mistake. They handled his credentials like props. They inspected his identification, turned it over, looked at it again, and still acted like nothing was enough. William remained steady, but he did something important. He kept reminding them there was an easy confirmation path they were choosing not to take. That's the core of what made this incident different. It wasn't confusion, it was refusal to verify. The first agent continued pressing for extra documentation, the kind of demand that suggests the goal isn't identification. The goal is submission. William didn't give them what they were trying to extract. Fear. He stayed formal. He kept insisting that verification be done through the proper system. That's when the agents tried the next move: isolate and label. They angled William closer to their SUVs, away from his own car, and away from the small cluster of pedestrians near the storefront sidewalk. The second agent used positioning to block sightlines from the nearest bystanders. The first agent talked over William, cutting off explanations, keeping the tempo fast so it felt like William was stalling, even though he was offering solutions. But the bystanders still saw enough. Phones came out. A woman near the curb raised hers and held it steady. Another person farther back zoomed in. The plaza lights above the exit lane made sure the video was clear. And on top of that, the plaza itself had its own cameras pointed at that exit because shopping centers don't like liability. William asked again for a supervisor. The agents didn't produce one. They didn't call in someone to de-escalate. They didn't run the simplest check that would have ended the stop. Instead, they escalated to restraints. They told William he was being detained. Then they put him in handcuffs in the open lane while cars continued to move through the checkpoint behind them. That detail mattered because it showed how comfortable they were turning a public shopping plaza into a detention stage. William didn't fight the cuffs. He didn't make the scene physical. He stayed controlled and kept documenting with his words: agency, verification options, supervisor request, and the fact that they were ignoring all of it. Then they moved him to the back seat of an SUV. The door shut. The checkpoint kept operating like nothing had happened. People kept driving through while a black federal officer sat cuffed inside a government vehicle because two agents decided they didn't need to confirm what he was telling them. And in that moment, William understood the real danger wasn't the checkpoint. It was the mindset running it. Detain first, verify later. Once William was in the back of the SUV, the whole situation shifted from public intimidation to paperwork protection. The agents didn't stop the checkpoint. They didn't pause operations to confirm what was already sitting in William's wallet. They kept the lane moving, kept the cones up, kept the optics calm for everyone else, and treated William like an item they could relocate out of sight. That's how these encounters get sanitized. Move the person. Control the setting. Then write the story later. Inside the SUV, William stayed steady. He didn't beg, he didn't bargain. He did what experienced officers do when they realize the other side is committed to the wrong path. He started mentally building a timeline. Time of stop, location, number of agents, what was requested, what was offered, what verification steps were refused, where the bystanders were standing with phones out. He also made one point clear the entire time through calm reporting, not argument. They could verify him immediately through official channels, and they were choosing not to. The drive downtown wasn't long, but it was long enough for a narrative to form. In the front seats, the agents talked like they had already decided what William was. Not a federal officer who needed a call to confirm, a problem they needed to justify. That mindset is what makes detain-first decisions feel normal to the people doing them. When they reached the federal processing area, the contrast was immediate. The intake staff weren't interested in ego. They were interested in identification and procedure. William was brought in still cuffed, still treated like a detainee, and still in public view of people moving through the building. That detail mattered too. The humiliation didn't end at the plaza. It followed him into a government space, attached to his name, attached to his face, attached to how strangers looked at him for those minutes. At the counter, William presented the same credentials the agents had already handled at the checkpoint. He reported his identity and agency again. He asked that a supervisor be notified and that verification be completed through the normal federal channels. This time, it happened the way it always should have. Within minutes, staff initiated the basic checks the plaza agents refused to do. They used internal directories. They contacted the appropriate duty line. They validated the credential information in a way that didn't depend on anyone's personal belief. And the moment the confirmation came back, the whole posture of the room changed. Because now it wasn't a debate. It was a fact. The intake specialist's reaction wasn't dramatic, but it was telling. She didn't treat it like a close call. She treated it like an unnecessary failure upstream, the kind that creates liability, and William was uncuffed. He was moved out of the detainee flow. The processing staff got him seated, got the situation logged properly, and started asking the right question. Why was he brought in like this if he could be confirmed that quickly? That question traveled fast. Supervisory staff in the building became involved because detaining a U.S. Marshal at a shopping plaza checkpoint isn't a normal error you shrug off. Someone had to own the decision chain. Someone had to document why the most basic verification steps weren't taken at the point of contact. And someone had to explain why a stop that began as a so-called safety checkpoint turned into a status interrogation without clear cause. William didn't need to raise his voice to make the seriousness land. He simply stuck to sequence and procedure. He reported that he identified himself, displayed credentials, offered verification channels, requested a supervisor, and was still searched, cuffed, and transported. Then he did the part people forget matters. He refused to let it end as a casual apology. He requested the incident documentation tied to the transport. He requested the names of the agents involved. He requested the timestamps. He requested to know what basis they were claiming for the detention. He made sure the building had a record that this wasn't a person caught without ID. This was a person with credentials that were examined and dismissed. While that was happening downtown, the plaza scene had already started spreading. Bystanders didn't need to understand federal agency details to recognize what looked wrong. A calm black man being pulled out of a traffic funnel, searched, cuffed, and placed in an SUV while cars kept moving through cones like a routine operation. The visuals did the work. The audio didn't have to be perfect. The sequence was enough. One of the videos captured something simple but devastating. The agents had time to search William and sort through his wallet, but they didn't take the time to verify. That's what the public saw. That's what it looked like. And later, when the paperwork came out, that gap became the center of everything. Because the paperwork had to explain why confirmation didn't happen until downtown. And here's where it got worse for the agents. The first draft of the narrative started forming immediately after William was removed from the plaza. Agents involved began documenting their justification in the typical way agencies do when they know a detention will be questioned. Language that makes refusal look like resistance. Language that makes escalation look like necessity. Language that minimizes the alternatives that were available. But William already knew what would decide this: recordings and timestamps. Checkpoints like that typically involve multiple recording sources. Agents often have body-worn or vehicle-based video. The SUVs had their own systems. The plaza had exterior cameras. And the public had phones. William's job wasn't to argue with a report. It was to force a comparison between the report and the footage. As soon as he was cleared and released, he contacted his side of the system. A deputy marshal colleague, Serena Holt, picked up and treated it exactly as serious as it was. She advised William to do 3 things immediately: lock down his timeline while it was fresh, preserve any contact information for witnesses, and request every piece of video tied to the plaza and the transport before anything could conveniently disappear. William followed that guidance. He documented everything he could remember without embellishing it. He noted what he offered and what was refused. He wrote down the sequence of escalation. He recorded where bystanders stood and which direction their phones were pointed. He noted that the checkpoint remained active during his detention, making the event visible to dozens of strangers. Then he waited for the paperwork. And when the initial documentation finally surfaced through official channels, it didn't match the speed of the downtown confirmation. The record reflected delay and uncertainty, where there should have been an immediate verification step. It leaned on vague phrasing where there should have been specific checks. It framed the detention like an unavoidable outcome instead of a chosen one. That mismatch was the opening. Because William didn't need to prove he was a marshal, that was already confirmed. What he needed to prove next was that the agents ignored a clear verification path and escalated anyway. That turns a bad encounter into an accountability case. By the time William got home, the situation had already entered its second phase, the part where everyone wrote their version down and hoped the recordings wouldn't contradict it. The first written summary from the checkpoint came through the usual channels, and it followed a familiar pattern. It leaned on vague language about uncertainty. It suggested William's identity couldn't be confirmed at the scene. It framed the escalation as a response to his behavior, instead of a response to the agents refusing the simplest verification step. William didn't debate the narrative on emotion. He attacked it on sequence. He documented what he had offered at the plaza: credentials, agency identification, and immediate verification through official channels. He documented what the agents chose not to do: call a supervisor early, contact a duty line, run a basic confirmation, or slow the contact down once credentials were shown. Then the footage started coming in. A bystander video was the first thing that mattered, because it captured the open lane reality the report tried to smooth out. It showed William being directed out, searched, and restrained in a public traffic funnel, while the checkpoint continued around him. It showed that the agents had the time and space to sort through his wallet, yet still didn't use that time to verify. That bystander, Tanya, didn't make herself the story. She simply handed over the cleanest timeline: what happened, how fast it escalated, and how little it matched the idea of a routine safety checkpoint. Her clip gave William something paper can't compete with: a neutral sequence other people could watch. The next layer was harder to get but more damaging. Plaza cameras covered the exit lane. Those cameras didn't care what anyone claimed later. They showed how William was pulled out of the flow when other vehicles were waved through. They showed where the agents stood and how quickly the contact shifted from traffic control into a containment posture. They showed bystanders filming from the sidewalk. They also showed that the scene stayed orderly, which cut against any suggestion that William created a safety threat. Then came the agency records tied to the agents themselves. Dispatch logs and call records told the story the plaza agents didn't want told. There was no early verification attempt. There was no prompt supervisor involvement at the key moment when William presented credentials. If the paperwork implied that a supervisor was consulted before restraints, the timestamps didn't support it. If the paperwork implied that William refused to identify, the videos showed him staying in place, staying controlled, and continuing to offer verification routes while the agents moved towards search and cuffs anyway. This is the part where accountability becomes unavoidable, because it stops being about interpretation and becomes about decisions. William and Deputy Marshal Serena Holt pushed it through the right oversight pathways fast. Not a social media campaign, not a public rant. Formal complaints routed properly, backed by a timeline, and supported by independent video and location data. That forced a structured review. A supervisor from the ICE side was assigned to collect statements, footage, and operational plans for the checkpoint. The review immediately focused on 3 points that were hard to defend. 1. Why the stop became a status interrogation without a clear operational trigger. 2. Why verification wasn't attempted when William presented credentials and offered official confirmation. 3. Why restraints and transport were used while the checkpoint continued as if nothing unusual was happening. When investigators compared the written narrative to the recordings, the gaps stood out. The written narrative tried to make the escalation sound like the only option. The footage showed multiple off-ramps the agents ignored, and the closer they looked, the worse it got. The checkpoint plan itself became part of the question. It wasn't just about William. It was about the structure that allowed agents to operate a surprise stop at a shopping plaza exit with minimal transparency, and then treat a calm person with federal credentials like a problem to be controlled instead of a claim to be verified. The consequences didn't come in one dramatic moment. They came in steps, the way real systems move. First, the agents involved were pulled off checkpoint work while the review is active. Then supervisors started asking why the obvious verification steps weren't done at the plaza. Then the case shifted from a simple complaint to a formal performance and conduct issue, because the evidence showed willful refusal to confirm and an escalation chain that created public harm. Agent Pierce, who drove the escalation, didn't get to hide behind confusion. The review focused on his choices, refusing verification, treating credentials as insufficient without testing them, and using restraints when less intrusive options were right there. Agent Soto didn't escape scrutiny either. Following along still meant participating in an unjustified escalation. The review treated her as a secondary decision-maker who could have insisted on verification and didn't. Supervisory accountability landed too, because someone approved the checkpoint posture, and someone allowed a system where verification could be skipped in favor of control. What happened to William mattered just as much. He didn't leave it as a personal insult. He treated it as professional damage. He documented the impact, a public detention in front of strangers, the effect on his reputation, and the operational risk created when federal agencies detain each other without verification. That kind of incident doesn't just embarrass a person. It undermines trust between agencies and makes every future encounter more dangerous. Because of that, the resolution included more than discipline. A policy change was issued for similar operations. When a person presented law enforcement credentials and offered official verification, agents had to attempt confirmation through approved channels before escalating to restraints unless there was an immediate safety threat. The policy also required supervisor notification at specific escalation points during administrative operations like checkpoints, and it tightened the documentation required when a stop shifted from brief screening into detention. Training followed, not as a feel-good gesture, but as a direct response to what the footage showed. The emphasis wasn't on optics, it was on procedure, confirmation steps, de-escalation, and making sure power didn't replace process. William didn't celebrate. He didn't posture. He just got something most people never get in situations like this: a clean record showing he was right to stay controlled and insist on verification. The system didn't give him justice out of kindness. It gave it because the timeline was locked in by cameras, logs, and disciplined reporting. And that's the real takeaway. If you ever find yourself in a power encounter where someone wants you to prove your humanity on their terms, the biggest advantage you can have is composure plus documentation. Not because it makes the moment easy, but because it makes the aftermath undeniable. Now, be real with me in the comments. If you were William, would you have stayed as calm as he did, or would you have lost it when they ignored verification and went straight to cuffs? If you want more stories like this, where preparation beats intimidation and accountability actually lands, like the video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
Good afternoon, sir. I need your license and registration.
What's the reason?
We'll get to that. Just give me your documents.
No, first tell me the reason why I'm being questioned.
You're making this harder than it needs to be.
I'm not. I'm asking a standard question. What's the legal basis for stopping me?
You were acting suspicious back in the lot.
What specific
What happened when a local patrol officer decided an off-duty U.S. Marshal didn't belong in a shopping plaza and tried to turn a simple food run into a detention with no clear legal reason? The answer mattered because the cameras didn't just capture an awkward stop. They captured a decision point where procedure got replaced by ego. Quick question before the story really gets moving. Where are you watching from? Country, state, city? Drop it in the comments. And if you watch these stories because you care about accountability, body cams, and people knowing their rights without turning it into chaos, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now rewind, because this didn't start with yelling. It started with a man moving through a parking lot like everyone else. Deputy U.S. Marshal Darius Cole had been off duty. No task force vest. No badge on display. Just regular clothes, a phone, keys, and the kind of calm that came from years of learning how fast normal moments could turn unpredictable. He stopped at a busy suburban plaza to do two things: grab food and pick up a prescription. It was the type of errand run people barely remember. Cars circling for spots, families crossing lanes without looking, a pharmacy line moving slow, delivery drivers parked where they shouldn't. Darius blended in on purpose. He moved slow, checked his surroundings out of habit, and kept his hands obvious when people passed close. Nothing about him was trying to make a statement. But one patrol car had been sitting on the edge of the lot longer than it needed to. Officer Brent Haskins was working the area. No call holding him, no active incident. Just that roaming patrol energy, where some officers start looking for a problem to justify the shift. Haskins noticed Darius early. Not because Darius did anything loud, because Darius didn't match what Haskins expected to see in that plaza. That was the quiet part nobody wrote down at first. Haskins rolled forward a little, tracked him through the lot, and watched him go from the food spot to the pharmacy. Darius didn't run, didn't stash anything, didn't argue with staff, didn't even look at the patrol car. He looked like a guy trying to get through a normal afternoon. Haskins still made a decision. He wanted contact. By the time Darius left the plaza, food bag on the passenger seat and a small pharmacy bag tucked away, Haskins followed him out like it was already a case. A few seconds later, the lights came on. Darius pulled over clean. No sudden movements. No shoulder drift. He parked, cut the engine, and put both hands where they could be seen. He didn't reach for anything. He didn't try to win the moment. Haskins stepped out already heated, fast walking to the driver's side like time itself was disrespecting him. His body cam was on. His tone was sharp. He demanded identification immediately, before explaining what law Darius had supposedly broken. This was the first tell. Because when a stop starts with commands and no reason, it usually means the reason is still being invented. Darius stayed professional. He kept his posture still. He didn't talk over the officer. He didn't argue the way some people do when they panic. He asked one procedural question that cut straight to the foundation: whether he was being detained and what the specific legal basis was. It wasn't a trap question. It was the question every lawful stop should survive. Haskins didn't answer it cleanly. He bounced between vague claims. He hinted at suspicious behavior without naming any behavior. He implied there had been issues in the area without describing an actual report. He tried a generic line about Darius not matching what he expected, but he couldn't anchor it to an actual violation. Then he did what officers do when the ground under them is weak. He made it about control. He treated the calm question like disrespect. He framed simple clarification as non-compliance. He acted like Darius had already done something wrong, just by not rushing to satisfy him. Darius didn't get baited. He didn't lecture. He didn't threaten. He didn't raise his voice. He offered a clean solution. He could verify identity properly, through the right channels, the way professionals handled it, when things were uncertain. He also identified himself as federal law enforcement in a controlled way, without trying to big dog the situation. That should have ended it. Instead, Haskins dismissed it and doubled down. He kept issuing commands that didn't match the level of justification he could articulate. He pushed for compliance first, explanation later. He tried to force Darius into a mistake, something he could label as resistance, something he could spin into probable cause after the fact. This was the power chess game. Haskins wanted Darius to either hand everything over instantly, so the officer could feel in charge, or hesitate in a way that could be called refusal. He wanted a box to check, a reason to write, a story that made the stop look clean. Darius stayed in the only lane that protects you in moments like this. Slow, calm, documented. He kept his hands visible. He kept his words limited. He repeated the same requests: legal basis for detention, supervisor, and proper verification. Meanwhile, the environment was doing what it always did in modern America. A bystander in the plaza entrance had noticed the lights. He drifted closer, phone angled in a way that was obviously recording. A security camera on a pole had line of sight on the stop location. A pharmacy storefront camera likely caught the patrol car, leaving the lot right after Darius. Dispatch logs were building a timeline in real time, and the officer's own body cam was capturing every second where he demanded compliance without a clear reason. Haskins didn't seem to think any of that mattered. Or worse, he thought he could talk his way out of whatever got recorded. He kept pushing. He repeated commands. He tried to tighten the situation like a knot. He acted like every calm sentence from Darius was a challenge. Darius didn't match that energy. He didn't posture. He didn't insult. He didn't try to dominate. He kept it procedural. And that's what made Haskins more aggressive, because procedure doesn't give ego anything to grab. Then the radio chatter shifted. Another unit was coming. You could hear it in the way Haskins started glancing toward the road. The stop had gone on too long for what he claimed it was. He needed backup, not for safety, but for validation. More uniforms meant he could turn this into a group pressure moment. But backup also meant something else. More witnesses, more body cams, more people who would later be asked directly what the legal reason was, and whether anyone could actually name it. As the distant sound of another cruiser approached, Darius stayed exactly the same. Hands visible, movement slow, voice controlled, repeating the same lawful requests. And Haskins, instead of settling down now that help was arriving, looked like he was preparing to perform. That was the moment the stop stopped being just one officer making a bad call. It became a situation with multiple cameras, multiple timelines, and a growing number of people who would have to decide whether they were going to protect the truth or protect the story. The second unit arrived fast, sliding in behind the first cruiser like it had been waiting for a reason to join. A third car followed a minute after that. Now there were more uniforms, more body cams, more radios talking over each other, and more eyes on Darius sitting still with his hands visible. Officer Haskins acted like the arrival of backup proved his suspicion was valid. He started narrating the situation to the others in a way that sounded confident, but it was thin on specifics. He leaned on vague labels like suspicious and refusing, even though Darius hadn't done anything except ask for the legal basis and offer verification. One of the backup officers, Paige Lund, didn't match Haskins's energy. She positioned herself at an angle that gave her a clear view of Darius's hands and face, and she kept checking Haskins' body language. She listened to the explanation, then asked the obvious follow-up. What was the actual violation or call for service tied to the stop? That question mattered because it forced the stop back into reality. Haskins didn't answer cleanly. He shifted again. He referenced the plaza, then the way Darius walked, then a general statement about proactive policing. He tried to make the stop sound routine, but his timeline didn't line up with what everyone could see. Darius had gone from food to pharmacy to his car. There wasn't a real incident that matched the level of force in Haskins' tone. Darius stayed in the same lane. He didn't speak like a man trying to win. He spoke like a man trying to keep the situation lawful and recorded. He reiterated that he was not resisting. He reiterated that he would verify identity properly. He reiterated that he wanted a supervisor and a clear legal basis for detention if the officer was claiming detention. And he did one more important thing. He made it clear he understood documentation. He referenced Bodycam audio and dispatch logs without making it a threat. More like a reminder that this wasn't going to be decided by whoever talked loudest. It was going to be decided by what the record showed. That made Haskins tighten up. He tried to reframe Darius's calm as attitude. He kept issuing commands that didn't match a simple traffic stop. He tried to pull Darius out of the car without clearly stating the lawful reason. He hovered at the edge of escalating the stop into something physical, but he hesitated because now he had witnesses who were listening for the justification. Leland and the third officer exchanged a quick look. They didn't have to say anything out loud. The body language said it. The reason was missing. At the same time, the environment around them was doing its job. A man near the sidewalk kept filming with his phone steady. He wasn't yelling. He was recording time, location, and the fact the officer had started with demands before reasons. Plaza security cameras pointed toward the roadway exit. Storefront cameras had captured the patrol car tailing out right behind Darius. And dispatch was recording more than most people realize. Every radio transmission, every unit arrival time, every stated reason for the stop, every request for records checks. That timeline becomes a skeleton you can't lie around later. Haskins tried to control that too. He radioed in like he had a clear basis, but he kept it vague, the same way he talked in person. He avoided committing to one specific reason because committing to one reason creates a comparison point. And comparisons are what break false stories. Darius stayed patient. He didn't flood the scene with words. He kept it simple. Supervisor, legal basis, verification. Eventually, the radio traffic changed again. A supervisor was monitoring the channel and started asking pointed questions. Not emotional questions, procedural questions. Questions that forced clarity. The supervisor wanted to know what the stop was for, what the detention was based on, and why it was taking this long. Haskins tried to answer in a way that protected his pride. He gave a reason that sounded like an afterthought. But the longer he spoke, the more he exposed the problem. He was searching for the reason after the stop had already started. That was the turning point. Because once a supervisor hears that, the goal shifts. It stops being about control of the scene and becomes about contain the liability. The supervisor ordered verification through correct channels immediately. Darius provided what he could without escalating the stop. He gave his name and the minimum information needed for identity confirmation. He offered a direct path, contact through official law enforcement coordination, and federal duty channels, not through random demands on the roadside. Dispatch ran what it could. The supervisor pushed for a confirmation method that didn't depend on Haskins believing anything. That's the difference between ego policing and real procedure. Real procedure doesn't care about feelings. Within minutes, the verification started coming back clean. The name matched. The credentials matched. The federal affiliation checked out. The pieces lined up in a way that wasn't negotiable. And right there, the entire tone of the scene flipped. Haskins went from pushing commands to trying to end the stop quickly. His posture changed. His voice dropped. He stopped performing. He started scanning for an exit that didn't make him look wrong. The other officers adjusted too, but differently. Lund looked relieved, not impressed. The third officer looked irritated, like he'd been pulled into something avoidable. The supervisor's voice on the radio was controlled but tight, the kind of tone that meant paperwork was already forming in their head. Darius didn't gloat. He didn't lecture. He didn't push his status. He stayed calm and did what professionals do. He requested the supervisor respond in person. requested the incident be documented properly and made it clear he wanted the record preserved. He didn't make it personal, he made it procedural. That's what made it harder for anyone to dismiss. Because now it wasn't just a bad vibe stop, it was a stop where an officer demanded ID, failed to articulate a clear legal reason, escalated when questioned, and only backed off after verification forced reality into the scene. And the record of that existed in multiple places at once. As the units began to loosen their positions and the pressure eased, Haskins tried to move the stop toward a quick, everyone go home ending. Darius didn't let it turn into a casual reset. He stayed polite, stayed controlled, and stayed focused on accountability. He knew what this was going to become. That night, Darius didn't treat it like an unpleasant roadside moment that would fade. He treated it like a documented event with legal exposure. He called his chain through federal channels as soon as he got home. Not to brag, not to threaten, to report a local officer initiating a stop without a clear legal basis, escalating when asked for the basis, and only backing down after forced verification. His supervisor didn't need the story dressed up. The key details were enough: time, location, unit numbers if known, the stop duration, and the fact that multiple recordings existed. Within hours, preservation requests started moving. The priority was simple: lock down every record before anything could be lost or overwritten. That meant bodycam and dashcam from every officer on scene, dispatch CAD entries and radio audio. The initial reason entered for the stop, if any plate checks, name checks, and call notes. Plaza security footage from parking lot poles and store cameras. Any civilian videos already circulating the next morning. The local department got contacted through proper leadership channels, not a random argument between agencies. Command-to-command communication. The message was clear. This stop involved an attempted detention of a federal law enforcement officer and appeared to lack a lawful basis, and the recordings needed to be preserved immediately. That changed the internal temperature fast, because now it wasn't just a citizen complaint that could be delayed. It was a risk event with documentation and an outside agency watching the response. Internal Affairs opened a case within days. Haskins was pulled from normal patrol duties while the review started. That alone told you the department knew the footage wasn't going to be helpful to him. When investigators reviewed the body cam timeline, the core issue became obvious. The stop began with commands and ID demands before a clean legal reason was stated. The reasons Haskins offered later didn't align with the first minutes of audio. His explanations shifted depending on who was listening. That's the kind of inconsistency that destroys credibility. Dispatch logs made it worse for him. The CAD entries and radio traffic showed when he decided to follow, when he initiated the stop, what he told dispatch, and how long it took before his supervisor forced verification. If the paperwork said one thing but the recorded timeline showed another, the paperwork became evidence of a problem, not a shield. Then the civilian footage started circulating. Not every video went viral, but enough people in the community saw it. The bystander clip showed the posture and tone. It showed the officer treating calm procedural questions like defiance. It also showed the sudden flip after identity confirmation, which always looks bad because it suggests the officer didn't care about rights until status entered the room. Local media caught wind and asked the department for comment. The department responded like most departments do at first. Limited statement, review pending, officer placed on an administrative assignment. But the pressure didn't go away, because the situation had something the public rarely gets: clear recordings and a clean timeline. Behind the scenes, prosecutors started paying attention too. If Haskins wrote reports that didn't match his own body cam, that wasn't just a policy issue. That was the kind of mismatch that can follow an officer into court for years. Defense attorneys request body cam in cases. Judges review credibility. Once an officer is tagged as unreliable, it can affect every case they touch. That's the professional damage most people don't understand. Even if an officer keeps the job, credibility loss can end their usefulness in patrol work. Supervisors stop putting them on major calls. Prosecutors hesitate to file cases built on their word. The officer becomes a liability. In this case, the department had multiple problems at once. A stop that looked unsupported at the start. Escalation framed as non-compliance without a clear, lawful command basis. A supervisor having to step in and correct the process over the radio. A rapid tone change after federal identity confirmation. Documentation everywhere, including dispatch and external cameras. The federal side didn't need to overreact. They just needed to insist on the record and the review. That alone forces accountability, because it removes the option to rewrite the story. Over the next few weeks, Internal Affairs interviewed everyone on scene. Backup officers gave careful statements. They didn't want to lie for someone else. They also didn't want to be blamed for something they didn't start. The safest thing for them was the truth. The legal basis wasn't clear, and the stop dragged until verification ended it. That left Haskins alone with his own footage. By the end of the review phase, the department had to make a decision. Keep an officer on the street who initiated stops based on vibes and tried to build justification after the fact, or take action and show the public they understood the exposure. The outcome hit Haskins where it mattered. He was suspended and removed from field duties during the investigation. The department began termination procedures based on policy violations tied to lawful detentions, escalation, and reporting consistency. His credibility took a direct hit, creating long-term court risk. Civil rights exposure became real because the stop showed an attempted detention without a clear, articulable basis. Documented on video, Darius didn't go on a tour talking about it. He didn't posture online, he went back to work. But inside the local department, the incident didn't disappear. Policy updates followed because leadership needed to show change. Clear articulation requirements for stops documented at the start, not later. Mandatory supervisor check-in for suspicious person contacts that extend past a short threshold. Stronger rules on camera preservation and dispatch record retention. Training focused on lawful detention standards and how to handle identity verification without turning it into a dominance contest. And the biggest lesson was simple. Recordings don't care who feels disrespected. Recordings care about sequence, cause, and conduct. Darius won because he didn't escalate. He didn't get pulled into the emotional game. He stayed calm, kept his hands visible, kept asking the same procedural question, and made sure the system created a record that couldn't be rewritten later. Now I want to know what you would have done in that driver's seat. Would you have stayed as controlled as he did, or would the pressure have pushed you into saying something that could be used against you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you've seen a stop like this in real life, share what happened. And if you want more real modern stories where accountability comes from procedure, cameras, and people refusing to be bullied, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.
Hey, hold up right there. What are you doing out here?
Just resting here.
Let
Why
me-
you ask me?
Let me see your ID and what's in the bag.
I can show ID. I don't consent to any search.
Just let me look inside your bag and everything will be okay.
No. I don't consent.
What happened when officers rolled up on a disabled black veteran sitting in his wheelchair outside a plaza, demanded proof he belonged, and kept tightening the rope after his ID checked out? Here's what made it different. The cameras didn't just capture an ugly interaction. They captured an unlawful detention taking shape step by step. Quick pause. Where are you watching from? State or country, drop it in the comments. And if you like stories where people stay calm, know their rights, and force accountability without escalating, hit like and subscribe. Now rewind. Jacob Jackson had just finished a VA outpatient appointment and a pharmacy pickup. 36, Army vet, medically retired. Some days he used a leg brace and cane. That day he used the chair. He stopped at a plaza for 2 reasons: an accessible restroom and a place to sit for a minute before driving home. He parked his adapted SUV in an accessible spot, transferred to his wheelchair, and rolled toward a bench near the storefronts. Shoulder bag clipped to the chair, medical paperwork inside, normal errands, quiet afternoon. Then a patrol car slid in. Officer Dale Mercer approached first. Hard posture, quick steps. He didn't come in with a friendly check. He came in like Jacob was already a problem. Officer Tessa Reed followed, hanging back half a step, watching. Mercer demanded identification and started probing why Jacob was there. He referenced a call about someone suspicious. He didn't give a specific description. He didn't name a store. He didn't point to any actual complaint. Jacob didn't argue the vibe. He went straight to the legal frame. He asked what the stop was based on and whether he was being detained. Mercer answered with control instead of clarity. He told Jacob to stay put until he figured it out. That mattered. A person doesn't need permission to sit outside a coffee shop. Once an officer says you're not free to leave, it's no longer a casual conversation. It's a detention. Jacob turned his chair-mounted phone slightly and made it obvious it was recording. He did it the way experienced people do it. Calm, visible, no theatrics. Mercer immediately tried to shut it down. He ordered Jacob to stop recording and tried to frame the phone as interference. Then he leaned in toward the mount like he might take it. Jacob didn't swat his hand. He didn't grab the phone. No sudden moves. He simply stated he wasn't giving up his property without legal grounds and that he was recording for safety. Reed kept watching. She didn't jump in to support Mercer's demand. She didn't tell Jacob he was wrong. She just watched, like she knew this was getting sloppy. Mercer switched targets. He pointed at the bag on the chair and pushed for a search. No warrant, no probable cause, just pressure. Jacob denied consent. Clean and simple. Mercer tried to turn that refusal into suspicion. He implied it would go easier if Jacob cooperated. He hinted at consequences without naming any lawful reason for them. Jacob stayed factual. He explained he was a disabled veteran on an errand run. He offered his government-issued ID and kept his hands visible while doing it. He didn't start explaining his whole life. He didn't answer the extra probing questions. He kept the conversation narrow. Mercer glanced at the ID, then tried another dominance move. He ordered Jacob to stand up. It was an absurd demand. Jacob was in a wheelchair with a visible mobility limitation. Jacob didn't insult him. He stated plainly that he couldn't comply and that Mercer needed to give instructions consistent with his disability. That's when a couple pedestrians slowed down. One woman near the coffee shop entrance stopped and raised her phone. She didn't get close. She just started recording from the sidewalk. Mercer noticed the second camera and got sharper. He asked questions that had nothing to do with the plaza bench, where Jacob lived, who he was meeting, why he was in this area. The subtext was clear. Jacob didn't debate subtext. He asked for Mercer's name and badge number, then Reed's. He repeated the details out loud so the recording captured them. Then he requested a supervisor. Mercer refused at first and brushed it off and walked back toward his cruiser to run Jacob. More time, more leverage, more chance to manufacture a reason. Jacob didn't chase him. He didn't roll away either, not in a chair, not with an officer already acting unpredictable. He stayed still, kept recording, and kept his posture neutral. Mercer came back to the radio and called for backup. And that's where the power game shifted. Because once more officers arrived, this wasn't just about what happened. It was about what got documented. Backup changed the temperature fast. Another patrol car pulled in and parked close enough to box Jacob in without touching him. That wasn't an accident. It signaled control. Officer Mercer started talking first, trying to lock the story before anyone asked questions. He told the new officer there had been a call about someone suspicious near the storefronts. He said Jacob matched. He said Jacob refused to cooperate. Same play every time. Turn a calm person into a problem on paper. Jacob didn't argue about tone. He stayed on the legal lane. He asked again whether he was being detained or free to leave. He asked what specific facts created reasonable suspicion, not vibes, facts. Mercer didn't give facts. He gave labels. He also kept pushing for the phone to be turned off, like the recording itself was the offense. Jacob didn't comply with that. He stated he was recording for safety and accountability. He kept his hands visible and didn't touch the phone. He didn't turn it into a contest over the device. Mercer switched to the bag again. He wanted a search. He kept framing it like a safety issue, like Jacob in a wheelchair was some unknown threat sitting outside a coffee shop. Jacob denied consent again. One sentence, no extra explanation. Mercer tried to pressure him into changing his mind. He started hinting that refusing consent would drag this out. He floated towing Jacob's SUV, even though Jacob wasn't even in the vehicle. He floated disorderly conduct, like sitting quietly could be spun into a charge if Mercer said it confidently enough. This is where the stop stopped being about a call. Mercer wasn't investigating. He was shopping for a reason. Reed finally asked Mercer what the original complaint actually was. You could see her trying to get something solid to stand on. Mercer didn't answer her cleanly. He brushed her off and redirected to Jacob like he needed a target. Mercer then tried to force movement. He ordered Jacob to leave the plaza immediately. That sounded authoritative. It wasn't automatically lawful. A plaza is private property open to the public, but officers don't get to invent trespass on their own. A real trespass requires the property owner or agent to revoke permission. No revocation, no lawful trespass enforcement. Mercer didn't have a manager. He didn't have a written notice. He didn't even have a store pointing at Jacob. Jacob did something smart. He didn't say he'd never leave. He asked whether Mercer had a trespass request from property management. He asked whether he was being issued a formal trespass notice and who authorized it. Mercer didn't answer. He pivoted again and went back to identity. Jacob provided his ID again, slowly with visible hands. Veteran ID included, state ID included, everything matched. Address, name, photo. Mercer still didn't let go. That's when the mask slipped. Mercer made it clear without saying it outright that Jacob didn't look like someone who should be there. He framed the plaza like it belonged to a certain kind of resident. He framed Jacob like an intrusion. No slur, no big speech, just that ugly little assumption sitting under the whole encounter. Reed's posture changed. She glanced toward the bystanders. A couple people had stopped near the coffee shop entrance, phones up. Nina was still recording from the sidewalk. She didn't move closer, she just kept the frame steady. Mercer noticed all those lenses and got more aggressive, not less. He stepped towards Jacob's chair and reached toward the phone mount again. Jacob didn't grab his wrist. He didn't flinch into a sudden move. He stated clearly that Mercer wasn't allowed to seize his phone without legal grounds and that any attempt to take it would be captured by multiple cameras. That line worked because it was true, not because it sounded tough. Mercer backed off half a step, then tried to salvage it by calling the recording interference again. He started talking about obstruction. Jacob didn't debate the law with him roadside. He just asked if Mercer was ordering him to stop recording and under what statute. Mercer didn't provide one. He couldn't. He didn't want to say something verifiable on camera. That's when Jacob requested a supervisor again. This time, Reed didn't dismiss it. She didn't say yes either. She just looked at Mercer like she understood the danger of continuing without oversight. Mercer made the call. A few minutes later, Sergeant Alvarez arrived and walked in like someone who'd already read the room. He looked at Jacob in a wheelchair, then at the officers, then at the bystanders recording. He didn't posture. He asked Mercer for the basis of detention and the reason for escalation. Mercer tried to summarize it into something clean. Alvarez asked follow-ups. The story started wobbling. The call description stayed vague. The smell claim didn't fit because Jacob wasn't even in a car. The trespass angle fell apart because nobody from the plaza had asked for it. Alvarez then asked Jacob to explain what happened. Jacob kept it tight. He said he was resting outside the stores, got approached, got detained without a clear reason, got pressured for consent, and got ordered to stop recording. He also stated he had mobility limitations, and Mercer still issued commands that didn't match reality. Alvarez made a quick decision. He instructed Mercer to end the detention. He told Jacob he was free to leave. He also told Mercer to preserve all body cam footage and write the report as a full narrative, not a shortcut. Mercer didn't look happy. He didn't argue with the sergeant either. Cameras were still rolling. Jacob didn't gloat. He didn't thank anyone. He rolled toward his SUV, transferred carefully, and left without drama. And Mercer stayed behind in the plaza parking lot, surrounded by the one thing he'd tried to shut down the whole time: records. Jacob didn't go home and cool off. He went home and documented. He saved the recording twice, cloud and local. Then he wrote a timeline while the details were still sharp: time, place, officer names. The exact sequence: ID demand, detention statement, search pressure, recording demand, reach toward the phone, backup arrival, supervisor arrival, release. That timeline mattered more than the internet clip. Nina posted her video that night. Short caption: no long rant. The footage showed the basics: Jacob in a wheelchair outside a plaza, Mercer crowding him, trying to control the phone, trying to turn a non-issue into a detention. The bystander angle also caught Mercer's tone shifting once he noticed multiple cameras. By morning, it spread through local pages, then veteran groups, then regional accountability accounts. Same predictable comment war followed. People yelling, "Just comply." Other people saying, "No, comply with lawful orders, not ego." The loudest voices didn't matter. Paperwork did. Jacob filed a formal complaint with the department the next day. He didn't write it like a story. He wrote it like a report. Bullet points. Requests for evidence. Specific items. Body cam from Mercer and Reed. Any dash cam footage from responding units, CAD notes, and dispatch audio for the original suspicious person call. Supervisor notes from Alvarez. Any incident report or field interview card tied to Jacob's name. Any documentation claiming trespass authority or property manager request. He also filed a public records request where applicable, because Jacob wasn't new to how agencies stall. Then he contacted a civil rights attorney, not because he wanted a payout headline, because he wanted the process to stay honest and fast. Internal Affairs opened a review. They didn't do it out of kindness. Nina's video forced visibility. Jacob's complaint forced structure. Together they blocked the usual escape routes. The body cam footage sealed it. Mercer couldn't articulate a stable basis for detention. The call stayed vague. The trespass angle had no property authorization. The smell talk didn't match the reality that Jacob wasn't in a vehicle. The pressure for a bag search looked exactly like a fishing expedition. The attempts to stop recording looked worse than everything else. Reed's footage didn't make her look great, but it showed hesitation and restraint. She didn't pile on. She didn't grab the phone. She didn't escalate force. That difference mattered when the review turned into accountability. Alvarez's arrival showed the clean line between bluff and policy. The moment a supervisor demanded facts, the stop collapsed. The department tried to contain it with a short statement. Standard language. Reviewing the incident. Taking it seriously. No details. Behind the scenes, the consequences hit. They pulled Mercer off patrol during the investigation. Then came discipline. The final decision landed after the internal review wrapped. Mercer lost his job. They also mandated retraining for Reed and her unit on detentions, consent searches, and recording. Not because training fixes everything, but because the department needed documented corrective action once the city started asking why a disabled veteran got treated like a suspect on a plaza bench. The plaza itself got dragged into it too. Management released their own statements saying They never requested a trespass and never asked officers to remove Jacob. That mattered. It stripped away one more excuse. Jacob didn't celebrate online. He didn't do victory videos. He stayed quiet and handled it through the channels that create real consequences. A few months later, through counsel, Jacob reached a settlement with the city. Nothing cinematic, just realistic. Damages, legal fees, and an agreement that supported policy changes and auditing stop justifications in that retail corridor. Jacob used the money the way people actually use it. Therapy, mobility equipment upgrades, a cushion and brace replacements that insurance loves to delay. Practical stuff. Then he did one more thing that made the story bigger than one plaza. He partnered with a local veterans center and hosted a short workshop, how to survive and document police encounters while staying safe. No anti-cop speeches, no fantasy tactics, just clear guidance. Keep your hands visible. Stay calm. Ask if you're being detained. Ask for the reason. Don't consent to searches if you don't want one. Don't physically resist. Record if legal. Request a supervisor. Then write the timeline and file the complaint with specifics. That's what Jacob did. That's why it worked. So let me ask you, if you were in that chair and an officer tried to take your phone and search your bag with no clear reason, would you have stayed that controlled? Or would you have gotten pulled into the argument they wanted? Drop your take in the comments. Share this with someone who needs it. And if you want more stories where knowledge beats intimidation and accountability actually lands, like the video and subscribe.
Nice. We need to speak with Lena Reyes right now.
You can talk to me. Do you have a judicial warrant?
We're not here to argue. We just need a quick conversation with her.
Not back there. Employee area is private. Show me a judge-signed warrant or you stay in the
Sir,
public area.
don't interfere with federal business.
What happened when 3 masked ICE agents walked into a packed neighborhood cafe in Madison and decided they could pull a worker out from behind the counter on a last name match? It didn't turn into a quiet conversation. It turned into a public standoff. And the cameras didn't just catch an ugly moment. They caught a federal team pushing past basic rules on private property. Quick pause. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or state in the comments. And if you watch stories where people keep their dignity, hold the line, and make power answer to process, hit like and subscribe. These situations don't get handled by courage alone. They get handled by receipts. Now, rewind a bit, because this didn't start with yelling. It started with confidence, the kind that comes from people who assume nobody will challenge them. The cafe sat in a busy strip where everyone knew everyone. Lunch rush bled into mid-afternoon, laptops open, strollers parked by the window, regulars posted up like it was their second living room. The worker they wanted was Lena Reyes. Early 20s, fast hands, soft voice. Always on time. She didn't share much about her life outside work, not because she was hiding something, but because she'd learned what happens when people hear a Spanish last name and start guessing. The owner was Owen Carver. Not flashy, not the type who wanted to be a hero online. He ran his business tight. Schedules, training, clear boundaries. He also had a policy for law enforcement contact. Written down. Employees had seen it during onboarding. It wasn't anti-cop. It was follow the rules or leave. That afternoon, the front door opened and 3 men walked in wearing masks, not medical masks. Face coverings that made the whole room tense on instinct. They didn't browse the menu. They didn't line up. They scanned the counter like they already owned it. They identified themselves as U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and said they were looking for Lena Reyes. They said they needed to question her. Right there. Right now. Like the cafe was their interview room. Owen stepped forward before they could angle around the register. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He asked for what mattered. A judicial warrant. The agents didn't produce one. They tried to keep moving anyway. Toward the side gate that separated customers from the workspace. Toward the back where bags were stored and staff took breaks. They acted like the counter line was a suggestion. Owen blocked the path. He told them the employee-only area was private, and they weren't entering without the right paperwork. He also made it clear Lena wasn't being questioned on the floor like some public example. The agents tried the usual pressure game. They implied Owen was interfering. They implied they didn't need permission. They implied the badge did the talking. Owen didn't take the bait. He kept the same tone and repeated the same point. Private property, employee protections, and no access beyond the public area without a judicial warrant. That's when the staff clocked what was happening and moved without panic. Maya, the shift lead, slid Lena back and away from the front line. Jamal stepped out from the kitchen area and stood shoulder to shoulder with Owen. Priya, the assistant manager, didn't argue with anyone. She pulled out her phone and made a call to the neighborhood business district office. In less than a minute, it became a barrier. No shouting. Just a line that said, "You're not walking through us." Customers started recording. The agents kept trying small moves. Step left. Step right. Lean forward like they might slip through a gap. They looked for the weak spot. There wasn't one. They tried changing the target. They pointed toward Lena again, even though she wasn't in reach. They wanted her to react. They wanted fear. Fear makes people talk fast. Fear makes people comply. Lena didn't give them that. She stayed behind the staff line, hands tight, eyes forward, breathing shallow. She looked like someone forcing herself to stay steady because she knew one wrong move could become a headline. Owen stayed locked in, calm, procedural. He didn't debate immigration. He didn't argue politics. He kept it on one track. Authority has limits, and paperwork matters. That's the part a lot of people miss. He didn't win the moment with a speech. He won it by refusing to let them change the rules mid-play. Then the agents made their biggest mistake. They kept pushing after being told no. They kept trying to turn private space into their workspace without the authority to do it. And that's when Priya's call paid off. Because the neighborhood business district's legal counsel didn't send an email. She showed up. Naomi Park walked in. She came in focused, with that look attorneys get when they're already sorting facts into categories. Lawful, not lawful. Liability, exposure. She asked to see what the agents had. They handed over papers like it would end the conversation. Naomi read them. Right there in the cafe. In front of witnesses. In front of cameras. And her expression didn't say, okay. It said, problem. Naomi didn't treat it like a debate. She treated it like a compliance check. She looked at the paperwork the agents brought in and immediately separated what they wished it meant from what it actually authorized. She pointed out the problem in plain terms. Nothing in their hands gave them the right to enter employee-only space, force on-the-spot questioning, or detain someone inside a private workplace just because they wanted to. That shift mattered. Up to that moment, the agents tried to run the room on confidence. Naomi ran it on process. Owen stayed in the same spot. Staff stayed locked in. That human line didn't wobble. The agents tried a new tactic. They leaned into the idea that they only needed a quick conversation and that everyone was overreacting. Naomi cut that off by explaining that workplace encounters don't work on vibes. Authority has lanes. If they wanted access past the public area, they needed the right kind of warrant. A judge-signed one. Then, she went sharper. She warned them they were drifting into trespass and interference with a business operation. She reminded them they were on camera from multiple angles. Security cameras, too. She didn't threaten. She just described the exposure like a weather report. The agents clocked the cameras again. You could almost see them recalculating in real time. One agent tried to flip the pressure onto Owen, implying he was blocking lawful federal work. Naomi didn't let that framing stand. She made it clear Owen didn't have to help them reach an employee inside a protected area. If they lacked judicial authority, the business had every right to deny access, period. That's when the agents tried to create a workaround. They attempted to call Lena out to the public area, not by asking politely, by acting like they could summon her the way a manager summons an employee, like she was obligated to step forward and make it easier for them. Lena didn't move. Maya stayed close to her without hovering. Jamal didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence carried the message. Customers kept recording. One regular shifted positions to keep all three agents in frame. Another customer, the one by the door, didn't just film. They narrated what was happening so the video had context if anyone tried to twist it later. Smart move. People forget details. A voice on the recording locks them down. The agents changed tone again. Less push, more irritation. They acted like the whole cafe was being unreasonable, like the staff were making a simple thing complicated. Naomi didn't care how they felt about it. She repeated the bottom line. They had no judicial warrants, so they weren't going behind the counter, and they weren't detaining anyone at this workplace. If they stayed and kept pressing, they risked turning this into a trespass situation with witnesses and video. The longer they stood there, the worse it got for them. Owen backed her up with the same calm posture he'd kept from the start. He didn't argue motives. He didn't accuse them of anything. He just refused to let them set the terms. That's when the agents finally started to lose their grip on the room. They couldn't isolate Lena. They couldn't get behind the counter. They couldn't scare Owen into stepping aside. And they couldn't stop the filming without making the situation even more radioactive. So they did what people do when they realize the record isn't going their way. They left the cafe without touching Lena, without speaking to her, without stepping behind the counter, and the second the door shut behind them, the whole place exhaled. Lena's hands started shaking after it was over, not during. That delayed reaction hit hard. It usually does. Your body waits until you're safe to let you feel it. Owen went straight into manager mode. He asked Priya to pull the security footage and back it up immediately. He asked Maya to write down a timeline while it was fresh. Times, positions, what each agent did, what they tried, who recorded, all of it. Naomi told them to preserve everything and keep communications tight. No random posts from staff that could muddy details. Let the evidence speak. Let counsel handle the rest. Meanwhile, the customers uploaded clips to social media before the staff finished wiping down the counter. Same core truth. Masked ICE agents walked into a neighborhood cafe and tried to pressure their way to a worker without the proper warrant, and the entire room refused to cooperate. By that night, people weren't just talking about the cafe. They were talking about how easily a last name can become a target. And within days, Lena sat across from an immigration attorney who didn't start with reassurance. He started with questions. What record? What match? What identifier? Because something about it didn't add up. The internet did what it always does when there's clean video and a clear power imbalance. It picked a side fast. People didn't just share the clip. They dissected it, frame by frame. They pointed out how the agents entered masked, how they tried to drift behind the counter, how they kept pushing after the owner denied access, how the staff formed a wall without touching anyone. That detail mattered. The cafe didn't give anyone an excuse to claim threat. They just refused entry. Local pages picked it up first, then statewide accounts, then national immigration advocates, then the outlets that chase anything with a badge and a viral clip. Lena watched strangers argue about her identity like it was entertainment. She didn't want fame. She wanted her name clean and her job normal again. Too late. Customers started coming in just to stare. Some people tried to support. Others tried to fish for details. One guy even asked if she was legal right there at the register, like he was entitled to an answer because he bought a coffee. Owen kicked him out. No discussion. Rafael Mendoza didn't treat it like a PR story. He treated it like an evidence problem. He asked for every detail the staff had. Timeline, camera angles, names, badge numbers if anyone caught them. Naomi already had the groundwork set. Security footage saved in multiple copies. Phone videos collected. written statements drafted while memories were fresh. Then Raphael went hunting for the reason Lena got targeted at all. The government line, at first, stayed vague. They leaned on the usual language about an ongoing enforcement matter and operational discretion. They didn't want to hand over specifics. Raphael pushed anyway. He demanded the underlying basis for the match. He asked for the identifiers the agents used before they walked into that cafe and tried to pull a worker into a workplace interrogation. When the records finally surfaced through the legal process, the match looked worse than anyone expected. It wasn't a direct hit tied to Lena. It traced back to Lena's sister. An old immigration record that should have stayed attached to one person, one file, one set of identifiers. Somewhere along the line, a database association linked Lena to it. Last name, family connection, maybe a shared address years ago. The kind of lazy linkage that software creates when humans don't force it to be precise. The agents didn't cross-check basics before showing up. No meaningful confirmation, no clean photo comparison, no verified date of birth match, no make sure this is the right person step. They moved on a name and a flawed system suggestion, like it was enough. That's when this stopped being a scary afternoon story and became a lawsuit. Lena filed against the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, exactly the way her legal team planned it. Not as a vague complaint. As a tight documented chain of actions, entry, pressure, attempted access beyond public space, attempted workplace questioning without proper authority, continued push after denial, all captured on video. The defense tried the predictable angle. They implied the agents only intended a consensual contact. They tried to paint the cafe's resistance as misunderstanding. They tried to shrink the encounter into a harmless check-in. The footage didn't cooperate. Depositions made it worse. Under oath, the agents couldn't dress it up the way they did in the moment. Their own answers showed the shortcuts, the lack of verification, the choice to arrive masked in a public business, the choice to keep pushing once the owner refused entry, the choice to treat a workplace like a hunting ground. And the attorneys didn't just ask what they did. They asked what training said, what policy required, what supervisors approved, who told them the database hit was good enough, who signed off on moving without deeper confirmation. That dragged supervisors into it. Then internal communications. Then the agency had to explain, in plain English, why 3 agents walked into a cafe and tried to get to an employee without the kind of warrant Naomi asked for on minute 1. Lena's life narrowed during that period. Work, home, attorney meetings. She started jumping at unfamiliar cars outside her apartment. She didn't trust that the mistake was finished just because the agents left the cafe. A lot of people would feel that way after being targeted by name. Owen took heat too. A few online accounts accused him of protecting illegals. He didn't respond with speeches. He kept repeating one fact. His business followed the law, and the agents showed up without judicial authority to go behind the counter or detain someone at work. More businesses in the district started calling Naomi. They wanted copies of that law enforcement contact policy. They wanted training for their staff. They wanted the same calm script Owen used, because they saw how fast a normal day can turn. Months later, the case didn't fade. It sharpened. The judge let key claims move forward. Motions got argued. The public watched. The video stayed online. Every time someone tried to spin it, another angle surfaced. And then the date landed. Federal trial. Lena didn't walk into that courtroom as a viral clip. She walked in as the plaintiff with evidence, witnesses, and sworn testimony, showing the system didn't just make a mistake. It tried to act on that mistake in public, at her job, like she had no rights in the space where she earned her living. Trial week didn't feel like a big, dramatic movie moment. It felt like a slow grind where every tiny decision from that afternoon got dragged into daylight. Lena sat at counsel table while the government tried to frame the cafe incident as routine contact. They leaned hard on the idea that the agents didn't force anything, because nobody got physically grabbed. That was their lane. Make it sound harmless. Make it sound normal. Make it sound like everyone overreacted. Lena's attorney didn't let them set the definition. He put the timeline on the screen and treated the footage like a clock. He walked the jury through the same things you already saw online, but now with sworn testimony lined up behind it. He showed how the agents entered masked and moved with intention, not curiosity. He highlighted how they tried to drift toward employee-only space. He pointed out how they continued pressing after Owen denied access. He emphasized the part that mattered most. The agents acted like they could turn a workplace into an enforcement site without the authority required to do it. Then the defense had to answer the simple question they'd been dodging since day one. What did they actually have? Not vibes, not assumptions, not a database suggestion, actual verified basis. That's where it went sideways for them. Raphael's work turned into a centerpiece. He explained the match in normal language, no tech jargon. A flawed database association tied to Lena's sister. A last name and family link chain that got treated like certainty. He laid out the missing cross-checks. The obvious ones. The ones that would have prevented the agents from even stepping into that cafe. The jury heard it, and you could feel the temperature drop. Because once you realize they didn't verify, you have to face the next reality. If nobody had pushed back, they would have reached her. They would have questioned her at work. They might have detained her on a bad match. And they were ready to do it in front of customers like it was no big deal. Owen testified too. Not as a crusader, as a business owner who knew his rights and his responsibilities. He described the policy he kept for law enforcement contact. He explained why he asked for a judicial warrant. He explained why he didn't let them behind the counter. He described how the staff formed a barrier without touching anyone, because they understood the game. Don't escalate. Don't give them a reason to claim threat. Just deny access and document. Naomi testified and made it even cleaner. She explained what the paperwork meant and what it didn't. She explained why it didn't authorize workplace detention or entry into non-public areas. She explained why she warned them about trespass and interference. She didn't sound emotional. She sounded exact. That's what made it hit. Then came the depositions that got played for the jury. The agents had already committed to their story under oath, and their story showed how thin their verification was. They tried to explain why they moved fast. They tried to say they relied on systems. The more they talked, the more it sounded like speed mattered more than accuracy. The jury watched the cafe footage again after hearing all that. Now, it wasn't just a standoff. It was proof of intent, movement, pressure, a refusal to accept no until legal counsel showed up and made the risk real. And when Lena testified, she didn't try to perform. She described what it felt like to be targeted by name at work, with masked agents pushing forward like the space didn't belong to her. She explained how she kept quiet because she didn't want to make it worse. She explained what happened after, the fear, the attention, people treating her identity like public property. Closing arguments weren't flashy. They didn't need to be. Lena's attorney told the jury the case wasn't about politics. It was about process and harm. He told them the government can't treat a database error like a license to pressure someone at their job. He told them the footage showed the agents tried to do it anyway. The defense tried to shrink it down again. They called it a misunderstanding. They suggested no real injury occurred because Lena went home that day. The jury didn't buy it. The verdict landed hard. A major jury award of $10.3 million, exactly as written. The number told everyone what the jury thought of the government's version of events. After that, consequences came fast. Internal reviews didn't stay internal. Supervisors had to answer for sloppy verification standards. The agency tightened rules for workplace attempts and the threshold for action based on database hits. More required cross-checking. More documented confirmation before anyone approached someone at their job. More limits on pushing beyond public space without the correct warrant. They didn't do it out of kindness. They did it because liability got expensive and public. Lena didn't disappear after the check. She used part of the outcome to fund legal help and training for workers and small businesses. Real training. Scripts people could use under pressure. Policies owners could print and post. A hotline connection through attorneys who understood the system. She didn't sell fantasies. She sold preparation. A year later, she got invited to speak at conferences about workplace rights and enforcement contact protocols, including one in Chicago. She didn't act like a celebrity. She spoke like someone who survived something that never should have happened and decided to turn it into protection for others. Here's the lesson, and it's not complicated. Power counts on confusion. It counts on people folding because they don't know what's allowed. Owen didn't win because he argued. He won because he demanded process and refused to let the rules get invented on the spot. Lena didn't win because she got lucky. She won because her workplace didn't isolate her, and because everything got documented from multiple angles. What would you have done if masked agents walked into your job and started demanding access to a coworker? Would your workplace have a plan, or would everyone freeze? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you've ever dealt with something like this, share what helped you hold your ground. And make sure you subscribe, because these stories aren't just drama. They're a playbook for what accountability looks like when people stop getting intimidated and start getting smart.